Hello, this is the Bureau of Lost Culture. I'm Stephen Coates. In the early to mid-60s, many of the cities in the West were magnets, drawing in the young and hip from the regions, shaking off the austerity of the 50s, and many experimented with different ways of living and loving. Communes and squats were set up all over cities like London. But as the 60s drew to a close, many of those incomers and many of the young residents of the city decided to head back out into the country for a quieter, slower life, a village and market town. Some settled in places like North Suffolk, South Norfolk, open countryside of low hills and wide plains, few towns and many villages. And it was there that, in the mid-60s, a commune movement was established. Now, what was it like to live in a commune? What was it like to be born and grow up in a commune? Well, we're going to find out today because my guest Nancy Thompson was born in one of the longest running, the Shrubb Family Commune. It was set up in a big old farmhouse in rural Norfolk in 1970. But we're going to dig into all of that. But before we do, why don't you come and join our commune? Now, you can share your resources if you like, but you don't have to share your clothes or even underwear as happened in some communes. You could just share this story. You could even get our Bulletin of Lost Culture. Come to bureauoflostculture.com. It's always terrific to hear from people too, and more and more people have been getting in touch to say how much they enjoy the stories, but also to make suggestions. Thanks to my recent correspondents, Chris, Nick, Jed, and Julie for their suggestions. But back to today. As I mentioned, Nancy Thompson was a child of a commune, and she was also one of my correspondents. She wrote to me pointing out that there was a lot of countercultural life beyond London and the more obvious places in the UK, and that she had a story to tell. And Nancy's story, and that of her extraordinary mother, as I think you're going to find out, is quite something. It's a complex, tumultuous, and at times rather bewildering tapestry of interconnecting relationships, families, life involving travellers, gypsies and the gentry, encounter groups, blackmail, rogue psychiatrists, LSD and horses. Nancy says that her experience as a kid living in the Shrubb Family Commune was overwhelmingly positive, but there was a dark side of the counterculture too. She's come all the way from Cornwall in the southwest of England to Soho to tell me all about it. So, Nancy, welcome. Thanks for writing. Thanks for coming to Soho. And I thought we could start in this episode about being a child of a commune, first of all, by talking about your mum, who was one of the people who moved into them in the early 70s. And she was quite an extraordinary person. Tell us.
Okay, so my mum was born into an upper-class family, but she was extremely rebellious, basically rebelling against her upbringing. She was born in 1939, and she was supposed to have been a debutante, so she was supposed to have been presented at court and all of that. But she was actually kind of painfully shy, and
so like for anybody who doesn't know about the intricacies of the British aristocracy, the debutante system was when the young gals, as they were called, were sort of like paraded in front of the young gentlemen, right, to be selected or whatever to keep this establishment going, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so basically she did the hippie trail before it was even a thing. So that was like in 1957. She tried to hitch to India.
She tried to hitchhike to India on her own?
Yeah, she got to Palestine. She was very gutsy.
Jesus.
She was fearless.
Right.
And she got taken in by a Palestinian family because they were quite worried about her.
Sure.
And they rang my granny and said, "Oh, we've got your daughter." My granny just was not in, she was too busy breeding dogs and horses. And anyway, she ended up living in Morocco. She got a post as a nanny for an American ambassador's family. And she fell in love with the cook, who was a Moroccan Berber. She fell pregnant with my older sister. She was going to marry him, but she got cold feet at the last minute, and she came to London, and she was going to have my sister adopted, but she kept her in the end. And then one of the reasons she came back to England is she felt that if she'd married, she would never have been able to come home again, and she just felt that she would have lost her culture. And then she went back to her mother, who lived in this kind of mansion in the Midlands, and my granny just slammed the door in her face and said, how could you do this to me, you know, having an illegitimate child and a mixed race one at that, you know, because in those days there was a lot of stigma attached to, you know, women who unmarried women with children. My granny was so steeped in the class system. But anyway, my mum was obsessed with horses. They were like her absolute passion. And she advertised in The Lady for a female travelling companion and bought a wagon and a horse and started living on the road, working on farms in Somerset.
Southern England, right?
Yeah, and the New Forest as well. Because in those days, a lot of common land in the New Forest was given over to gypsies and they were allowed to camp there. It was like their right.
So she became a non-gypsy traveller, basically, then?
Pretty much, yeah. And she worked on a farm in Somerset and met one of the last horse-drawn Romany gypsy families and fell in love with their son and got married, actually. It was in the paper.
So gentry married gypsy.
That is the story of her life. Anyway, so she married this chap and had my brother. Well, actually, she left them when she fell pregnant. He went back to the family home, and amazingly, my granny let her come home. And she gave birth to this enormous baby boy, 10 pounds. And because she'd married my brother's father, my brother was a legitimate potential heir to the estate.
So your stepbrother, the son of a gypsy husband, was potentially the next heir to the whole estate.
I mean, my granny actually really liked gypsies. There's a thing about gentry and gypsies. They like hanging out together because they're, you know,
horses.
Yeah. And then my mum went to live in the New Forest and befriended people who had horses and stuff. And there was a chap who painted wagons and restored them. And he met the gypsy family that my mum had married into. And he said to them, why isn't your son married? He's a nice young man, you know. And they said, oh, he was married, my son. Would you like to see the wedding photos? He fell in love with my mum. He just
from the photos?
Yeah.
Wow.
He's like, that's the woman
this
for
is
me.
A story. Geez, moving quite fast here.
Yeah. And in the end, she found that he was trying to track her down. So she wrote to him and said, it's no use. I'm in love with someone else.
She's still married as well, right? Still married to...
She must have at some stage got divorced because she did get married later on. And I know that my brother's dad has remarried and now lives on his own site and has got 14 children.
Right, wow.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah. And his brother's got 15. I mean, honestly, he couldn't make it up. Anyway, so she got together with this wagon restorer and it was like a match made in heaven. They had the most beautiful wagon because he'd restored it and made it was all gold leaf with brass lights. And, you know, she knew about horses, he knew about wagons. So, and, you know, they've got these two little kids, my sister and my brother. And anyway, so they lived on the road together. But I think my mum, maybe she used to get like quite depressed, but she fell pregnant with his son, my other brother. Her version of the story is she said he thought she was mad because she wouldn't have sex with him, because maybe she just went off sex. I don't know, because she was pregnant. But his version is she just wouldn't get up. So maybe she was depressed. He just said she used to lie in bed and just stare at
prenatal depression.
Yeah. And actually, you know, living on the road in the winter is hard work. Sure. He just couldn't really cope. He had these two little kids. You know, you've got to earn a living. You've got to get the wood. You've got to get the water. You've got to do the horse, you know. And then you've got this pregnant common law wife, you know, who won't get up. And he didn't really know what to do. So he took her to the local asylum, which was in Worcestershire. It was Powick
Hospital,
that had a designated LSD unit.
One of many astounding things in this story is you said that she was incarcerated, which is a strong word, right, at the hospital, and that she met other women who were administered LSD.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a story in itself, isn't it?
Well,
what was the
Powick Hospital had the world's first ever designated LSD treatment unit.
Here is a sidebar about the psychiatrist Ronald Arthur Sanderson. Sanderson was born in the Shetlands, a group of islands 170 kilometres north-east of the Scottish mainland. He served in the Royal Air Force and then became a doctor at Wallingham Park Hospital, a psychiatric facility in the south of England. While studying the dreams of insulin coma therapy patients, he became interested in the work of Swiss psychologist Carl Jung. And in 1951, at the age of 35, he joined the staff of Powick Psychiatric Hospital, a large former Victorian-style lunatic asylum. He immediately set about improving the facility. He described the place as medieval, overcrowded and run down. The 1,000 patients subjected to electric shock and insulin coma therapies and lobotomies. In 1952, during a visit to Switzerland, he came into contact with Albert Hofmann at Sandoz Laboratories. Hoffman, of course, had discovered the effects of the hallucinogenic drug LSD by accident. He returned to the UK with 100 vials of LSD, called Delicid at that time by Sandoz, and started to use LSD with his patients in Powys, where the psychoanalysis was not advancing their therapy, and he recorded significant successes, even in the most severe cases. Powys Hospital had, as Nancy mentioned, the first government-funded centre, which would be the world's first purpose-built LSD unit. The programme that Sanderson used there he called psycholytic therapy, literally mind-loosening therapy, and used it for the treatment of illnesses such as severe depression and schizophrenia. And it became the established method for LSD treatment worldwide. But controversy was beginning to develop about the use of LSD in medical situations. And in 1964, after becoming disenchanted by the use of LSD as a recreational drug, Sanderson left Powys. Dr. Arthur Spencer continued the programme, but Sandoz suddenly stopped supplying the drug in 1966. Records say that 683 patients had been treated with LSD in 13,785 separate sessions. That's a lot of trips before the programme was discontinued. Sanderson went on to work at other hospitals and work with suffering people in many other ways. Despite having given up his work on LSD, he believed passionately in its benefits. He stayed completely certain about its medicinal use to the end of his life. He retired in 1992 and died in 2010.
I mean, Mum said she spoke to some of the women who said that they'd been given LSD, and they said it really helped them. But even today, it's not uncommon for women to be sectioned. You know, like, she's nutty. It's a trope, isn't it? Like, oh, she's a nutcase. And actually, you know, some of these women were just exhausted.
Sure, of course. We're at a time now when the potential therapeutic, healing and psychic qualities of psychedelics have been massively reassessed. And
Yes.
we're on the brink of this right now.
Yes.
That was already going on. And it's been said to me before that actually what happened because of the countercultural stuff, other uses by non-clinical people of psychedelics, that alarmed the establishment so much, which is why the jackboot came down and made them all illegal, which of course set back the potential use of psychedelics therapeutically by like 30, 40 years, right?
Mum said it wasn't administered to her because she was pregnant. Unfortunately for my brother's father, she fell in love with her psychiatrist, or rather he fell in love with her. And
she must have had something, your mum, then, right?
There was something really alluring about her, but actually this psychiatrist should have been struck off. He gave her elucidating drugs and asked her about her sexual preferences.
Elucidating drugs, like a truth drug? As a way of sort of seducing her, or kind
fancied her, didn't he?
Right. But I mean, so he basically took advantage of her by giving
Pretty
her
much.
drugs.
I mean, nothing happened in the hospital, I don't think. But at the end of her time there, he said, I think we should carry on seeing each other.
Right.
And he was married with 3 children.
Okay, definitely.
A very well-respected psychiatrist. Right. And so she left my brother's dad, went back to the village of her sort of family seat, and stayed in this cottage and had my brother, and then moved to a bungalow to be near the psychiatrist. She basically started having an affair with him.
So he was secretly doing this?
My brother's dad, he was heartbroken. He was really angry, and his pride was dented and everything. And he found a load of love letters that they'd written to each other, and he was going to go to News of the World and all of that, And the only reason he didn't is because he's got a very great respect for the gentry. And Mum said, think of my family. You can't do that. You'll bring shame on my family. So Mum moved now with 3 children to live near to her lover, the psychiatrist. Anyway, they had a flaming row one day, and Mum smacked him around the head with a cast iron frying pan.
Reasonable.
That was the end of that.
That was the end of that, right?
So he left. I mean, one of my brothers was like, he didn't want him to go, and he said, and this psychiatrist said to him, I've just got to go. And then Mum blackmailed him. She said, if you don't buy me a brand new trailer with fitted gas lights and all the rest, I am going to shop you to the British Medical Council.
Yeah, and the papers and all that.
Yeah, I'll get you struck off, basically. So he bought her a brand new trailer, and she didn't really have anywhere to put it, so she stuck it on the side of the road in the village where her brother now inherited the family estate. And she had a pony, a new price pony called Bracken, and a goat. And She was trying to live like a gypsy, but with no extended family, no money, no husband.
Well, no community.
No community and no support. In fact, the opposite.
And I guess in a sense, a pariah to the family in some ways.
Absolutely.
Right?
She was probably quite depressed. I mean, she was not coping, basically, and she was quite violent. She used to hit the kid. Realised it was just not a good setup for her. She just thought, I can't, this is...
Must have been tough for the kids too.
Really
different
tough.
Men coming and going.
Really, absolutely. Really tough and scary.
Mm.
Anyway, one of the things I think possibly she'd done when she was at Powick was something called encounter groups, which the hippies were quite into. And she said that group therapy was the best therapy she ever did, because you got to see yourself from different people's points of view, and it wasn't just like one-on-one or whatever. So she'd possibly been going to some encounter groups. This bloke came to stay who's a friend of hers, and this was a really exciting time. There were loads and loads of communes being set up. He'd been going around looking at communes. That's what people did. People used to go and check them out. And she was very down to earth and very practical, and she was a real country woman. Do you know what I mean? So she liked the sound of Shrubb, because Shrubb wanted to grow vegetables. They had goats. Everyone had goats.
It's weird, isn't it? I don't like goats.
Oh, I do. So there were some people in London. I think they were students, but there's a chap called Owen, and he bought it. I think maybe he inherited a bit of money or something. So he bought it for £500. And they were like, look, we're all living together in London. Why don't we go and live in the countryside?
It was a thing here, massive thing in America too.
Yeah.
I mean, Miles talks about it as though, like, in a way, everybody was exhausted after the late 60s. And not enough sleep, too many drugs. And of course, the psychedelic wave had crashed somewhat, particularly in America, with Altamont and various other events, where the kind of establishment had sort of stamped on it. So one of the responses to that was just to go out into the country. It was leave the cities behind and sort of try and create the new society more.
Absolutely,
in rural places where property was cheaper, where maybe it's possible to be self-sufficient.
Yeah, let's go back to grassroots.
Maybe connect with something which is a bit older. We talk about counterculture stretching back, particularly in these islands, through time. Connecting with something which was more rooted in the landscape. And
Definitely.
Maybe it's in some ways pre-industrial, right?
Absolutely, yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, Owen moved to Shrubb Farm with his friend, late 60s, early 70s. It was quite a kind of shifting group of people, so they kind of moved on, and then new people came. But one of the things that Owen did, and I think this is why it's still going, is that he set it up as a limited company. So nobody owned it.
That's a great thing, isn't it, to have done that, to have the vision or the ability, the generosity, I suppose, to do that. So he didn't even own it himself. It could exist beyond him, and even if he changed his ideology or whatever, it's still going. And we'll come back to the fact that it's still going, actually, which is extraordinary, right?
Yeah, it is, actually. But my mum's main motivation to move there, she wanted other people around for the children's sake. She wanted other children around, and she wanted other grown-ups around. And, I definitely think she did the right thing from that point of view, and she got there, and they were just all so relieved to be out of the trailer and have other kids around. And Mum was sort of diluted by all these other grown-ups.
Did you mean that in sense of maybe her own issues and anger or depression or whatever, in the context of having other people around?
So I just really take my hat off to those young people, because they were really thoughtful. And one of the things that, the children have got lots of different adults, and so they've got lots of sort of different ways of looking at the world, and basically, so she moved to the commune, and then it was good, so when she moved there were quite a lot of single mothers there whose relationships have failed, or they had children when they were young, and so actually it was really great for the mums, because they had each other for support, and then they could share the childcare, and it was really great for just things like sharing cooking. Mum only had to cook once every 9 days, but there were a lot of blokes there as well who were really dynamic and really practical, and and also they really liked having the horse and cart there, so they used that a lot as transport. They didn't always have a car, and if they did, it was like a wreck. Older sister started going to the local grammar school. The middle brother went to the local primary school. My other brother they'd sometimes all go to playgroup, him and the little kids in the pony cart and that. And we had loads of visitors, people just coming all the time, could do the rounds, and some of them were all right, some of them were freeloaders, some of them were, it was just a constant shifting people. My dad was from a working class family. He got very into the macrobiotic diet. There's sometimes young men get quite dogmatic about, they want to have a cause, do you know what I mean?
Surely not.
I don't mean he'd obviously.
You described him in your email as a sort of dogmatic macrobiotic.
Yeah, well, actually,
sort of fiend.
It's interesting because my mum had this theory about the macrobiotic diet. She said that humans have this need for rules. And so it was like religion was replaced with this really strict diet. And it's like my body is a temple and I can't eat yin food. And it was his idea to get together with my mum. She was 10 years older than him, very attractive. But he was also very cagey, and he didn't really, like the way Mum described it, she said the other hippies didn't really sort of trust him or like him very much because he used to sort of shut people out. But interestingly, loads of acid around. This is before Operation Julie.
I mean, just in terms of your mum's experiences and evolution, you said that like when she was at Powick, she wasn't actually administered LSD, but was LSD part of her life?
Hugely. Yeah.
Part of commune life as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So soft and free. And microdots were really strong.
So that was part of the life at Shrubb Farm
yeah,
too?
So here's an example of the way in which they took LSD. Firstly, what I want to say is that it wasn't taken in a hedonistic way.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were very careful about how they took it. And the way that I see it is that they were using the model that Sanderson was using in Powick, whereas they had a trip guide. So they, if anyone was taking acid for the first time, they made sure someone looked after them. And they didn't take it at parties. They took it to expand their consciousness.
I mean, personally, we don't need to dismiss the aesthetic pleasure of psych whilst honouring their potential for consciousness expansion.
So they did take it to like find out who God was and stuff like that, but also like they took it to try and work out what my dad's problem was.
Everybody recognises that this guy's got some issues.
Yeah, let's take LSD and try and work out what it is.
With him there or not with him there. It was like a kind of psychedelic intervention or whatever they call it.
No, it's more like therapy. This guy's got a problem. I wonder what it is. Let's take acid and see if we can get an enlightenment about it.
I like it.
And what they decided is that he was paranoid.
But we could have told you that.
But Mum said there was a lot of acid around. I took some and I had an enlightenment about him. I think he just couldn't cope with emotional demands on him. It was his way of sort of protecting himself, of kind of like shutting everyone out. He told her that he preferred it if people didn't like him because then they didn't expect anything from him. But the other thing that you have to remember is that this was an experimental time, and some of the ways in which the hippies were experimenting were quite dark. So like when my mum first met him, he was in this dope smoking cult with this bloke who was also a macrobiotic health food freak, quite a lot older than him. Again, you know, like maybe he was looking for a mentor or a father figure or something like that. But what they were into was getting really, really, really stoned and then being horrible to each other and trying to freak each other out, including kids, which is actually quite nasty. And
it's not quite nasty, it's very nasty.
Well, yeah, it's quite abusive. And
there's a dark side to the Summer of Love, isn't there? Let's just dive into a little bit about life at Shrubb Farm for you.
Yeah.
I mean, kids grow up and it's like, this is the world. They don't grow up thinking, I'm in a hippie commune, it's different than everybody. You do your thing and it's normal. There is this sort of social prejudice about communes. Of course, it's still going on, you know, they sort of layabouts and sponges. But in fact, you know, there's a lot of self-sufficiency, there's a lot of cooperation.
Yeah.
Right? There was this rather wonderful refuge aspect to it, which you've described for some women who were like, you know, beached after bad relationships or wanting their kids to actually be brought up in a more sort of holistic sort of setting. And also, I love all the practical details. You could buy in bulk, so things are cheaper. Composting the waste, working together and stuff like this. There was a sort of slightly medieval thing about it. In some ways, a lot of what you were doing is now taken for granted in a way. You know, people.
Absolutely.
We recycle.
Yeah, it's become normalised.
Lots of people in this city. You know, young people live in shared houses, right? Because they have to for economic reasons and stuff like that. So it's interesting to hear about this kind of ideology, you know, however scattered it was, that was sort of informed it, and then, you know, the acid informed it too. Just for me personally, I couldn't stand it.
No, me neither.
I like sort of my space roaming with other people absent. I mean, it's very nice to be social and to be countercultural, but
because we never had any money. You know, like one of the downsides of my upbringing is we were skint. Like it was not. It was like there's a lot of romance around like owning nothing, but the only new things I ever had were knickers. But we used to do this thing, right? If you ever went to London, we'd go to Cranks and we'd sit there. And we'd have a glass of tap water and then we'd just eat everyone's leftovers. And and that was our treat.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's like, I'm so glad I've always been... A lot of the stuff that comes up in this show is like, I'm so glad that it exists. And expressive dance, I feel the same way about it. It's like, I'm glad that somebody's out there doing it, but I just never want to see it.
Well, they used to show all their clothes.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm never going to do that. You know what I mean? I'll never share a joint.
I mean, they've set up a commune in Norfolk recently. And I was like, I was really positive about it. I was like, would you want to live there? And I said no. There was loads in Norfolk. But some of them had like themes, and like there was. I don't know if you looked at the Globs.
Yeah, rock and roll commune, right?
Right,
Psychedelic rock and roll commune.
That's it. Yeah, they were supposed to have been like the next Grateful Dead, but the English version.
I could see that. Yeah.
What did James and Jeremy Lascelles, first cousins once removed to Queen Elizabeth II, Sir Simon Stuart Richardson, a baronet, and Mike Bandura, a world authority on holograms, have in common? Answer: they were co-founders of the psychedelic rock band Global Village Trucking Company, better known, as Nancy said, to its friends and fans as the Globs. In the early 70s, they travelled countless miles up and down the motorways of the UK, playing at free festivals, parties, benefits, and occasionally playing gigs, often performing long, free-form jams. But the band, the road crew, the managers, the families, the friends and their pets lived together in a commune in a rundown thatched cottage in Suffolk. They've attracted some media interest, and we're going to hear a clip from one such documentary that was made about them now.
When 5 young men decide to form a pop group, they don't usually set up house in a remote cottage in the wilds of Norfolk, together with all their girlfriends. But the Global Village Trucking Company aren't an ordinary pop group. They're not very worried about making money, and they won't take any of the usual shortcuts to success. What they are determined to do is to make their own way without what they regard as the moguls of the record business, the promoters, the big managers, the professional manipulators. Global Village want to do it their way.
Well, we're a rock and roll band with a difference. The difference being the fact that we live as a community of about 15 people, all of whom in their own ways contribute to the music which comes out, even though the final product is just 5 musicians on stage. Our whole household is a self-contained working unit, which includes all the people who help get the show on the road, like the roadies, the managers, and then all the people behind the scenes, like back at the house, doing the domestic things. And it's all like a sort of great big family and a working team all in one, all pushing towards this end product of getting the music out. Like our aims are to make it, to get the music as good as possible and to get it out to as many people, but to enable that to support us in the way that we want to live, and that the two are very, very closely connected in terms of what we're trying to do. We get a lot of feedback into the music from the place we live in, which you wouldn't get like in the city. You'd get sort of speedy and neurotic music. It's a more organic thing altogether, which comes out in the music, a much more relaxed atmosphere.
So what, you mean some?
Well, we've decided it's a lot easier to be out in the country, which is why we're living out in Norfolk. It creates a much more harmonic feel, both within ourselves and with our environment. Like, people always think in terms of the country as a place to go away to and do nothing. It doesn't actually work like that with us at all, because within this small space, under this roof, there's incredible energy going on, there's incredible determinism to do something which we all believe in. And it gets very hectic at times, like tempers get frayed and people say very heavy things to one another, but basically it's great.
Everyone in Global Village has their own responsibility to the group. Helga's in charge of the washing. The idea is that all should work and play together in peace and harmony.
Don't tread too heavily on that bit of metal, Johnny, because you'll go right through it. Hey, Jimmy, do you know where the hole was?
Well, look up, you can see the sky.
It's all right, I can see it, yeah.
Predictably, the women do most of the housework, while the men are expected to keep the place from falling apart. There's nothing revolutionary about the division of labour. How much do the men help in the business of actually running the house?
Well, we have a rota and they're all supposed to do their separate jobs, the easy jobs, like cleaning the bathroom, which James helps Daniela do. Johnny's supposed to do the stairs, and we all have turns washing up every day, and we're supposed to keep the kitchen together on that day, do all the sweeping things. They do help a lot around the house, like Johnny mends the roof and he does the electricity. If we didn't have him, he did all the wiring in this house, which we'd have been lost without.
The way we derive our benefit from living together is by working together, because it helps give us a framework to operate in. See, we live together because we love each other, and we're given a way to love each other because we have to work with each other.
That's all right, George. Can't you see if there's a hole, you can see the sky through it. If I cover up the hole, you will no longer be able to see it. Got it?
The band is like a vehicle that provides a bit of momentum to keep us all together. Because if we were just a commune of people that weren't really doing anything, didn't have very sort of sharply defined aims, the whole thing might crumble around us, but because we're all going in a direction, and the band and the music and everything gives us that direction, we know it's not just going to disappear one day. Yeah, I can no longer see the sky.
Great!
And there was another place called Crow Hall, which was that had been set up in the 60s, so that was a big mansion, red brick mansion near Downham Market. And that was artists, and then there was the old rectory, and they were writers and stuff. There were other ones as well, so it was Shimpling, Thelneatham, there were loads.
They're all with kind of different tribes or different sort of themes.
Yeah, different themes.
Flavours.
I mean, the Global Village Trucking Company were quite well known on the head scene, everyone went to their gigs, you know what I mean? They were really trying to learn how to be tolerant.
Right.
And how to tolerate differences. And I think that's really admirable. And also they wanted to, there's something about, pebbles getting smooth because they rub together.
Yeah.
And, I really admire and respect them for doing that, because it's not easy, like you say.
And of course, in the response to your dad, where he was kind of a bit strange, was to okay, well, let's try and solve this by taking acid and, but let's try and work it out rather than kicking him out or getting, into
It was
massive
very unusual
conflict.
for anyone to be asked to leave.
Right.
And also, amongst all the visitors and people that turned up were waifs and strays that the police and the vicar used to send down to us,
Recognising that there was something good going on.
Yeah, but actually imposing things on us which potentially were quite dangerous.
Okay.
We also had a drug addict come and stay with us. He was a lovely man, actually, and he came to get off morphine because he knew he couldn't get a fix. And he took LSD. So LSD was used to cure addiction before the counterculture got hold of it very successfully, particularly alcoholism. So he got off morphine from taking LSD and living in the middle of nowhere. It was really hard work for the grown-ups because it's hard living with people. For the kids, I mean, I loved it. It was a really good start for my, in life. I had all these grown-ups who loved me and I loved them, and I had loads of kids around. Mum was diluted by all these other people. I think it's hard being a parent, and if you can share it with other people, then that takes the pressure off, particularly if you're a single parent. My dad left as soon as Mum said she was pregnant. He left that night.
Wow.
Yeah, this is a bit of a bee in my bonnet, but I actually think free love was a bit of a myth. It wasn't free love, it was free sex. But a lot of women were not on the pill, which meant they either had kids or they had an abortion. And a lot of people just stopped and left. Or went on and had kids with someone else. And
well, we've talked about this. In some respects, it was a sexual revolution for men, maybe not for women. That's incredibly difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But, I felt really loved by the people I grew up with. They were really good people. I mean, not all of them. Obviously, some bad eggs, but I don't know. We had this dog called Deluge because it used to wee everywhere. And it caught a little bunny rabbit one day, and I spent the whole day cuddling it like a little baby. And all the grown-ups were like, "Oh, we need to tell her the rabbit's dead and stuff." I mean, I knew the rabbit was dead, and they were like, "Oh, how are we going to tell her? How are we going to tell her?" And then they said, in the end, they said, "Oh, Nancy, it's supper time." And I went, "Hey, our Deluge," and chucked it at the dog, and
the dog ate it.
Yeah, dog ate it's fine. I mean, I knew it was dead.
At what point did you at some point did you start to kind of think,
have an awareness that I was living with freaks?
Yeah, or actually this isn't how everybody does things.
I'll tell you.
Right?
So we lived right down the end of a track. At one end of the track was a pub. At the other end of the track was the local farmer and a bungalow. Yeah, and a young couple moved in with kids. Yeah, so they thought he'd come down and meet us, which was quite brave of them, because there was a lot of prejudice about us and. you know, like the locals all thought the grown-ups all slept in a circular bed and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't true. And they were all swinging, by the way, keys in a hat on a Friday night.
But yeah, of course, the suburban swingers are at
Exactly,
it, but
yeah.
assume that the hippies are at it.
This was in the summer. All the hippies were lying outside naked, sunbathing. And this straight couple, that was the day they decided to come down and meet us.
Right.
And I was about 4 or 5. I was like, Mum, someone coming down the track, better put your clothes on. She's like, what? And they got closer and closer, and I was like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. It's definitely not normal to lie without any clothes on. And then they got close enough for us to hear them say hello. You know, and they were really nice, and it was fine. But that was the moment for me where I was like, yeah, I don't think we're normal, whatever that is. Kids aren't born with prejudice. And when you have little baby goats, all the little kids want to come and see the baby goats. Do you know what I mean? They all wanted to come to my birthday party.
Right.
But when I got to a certain age, that's when kids started to inherit their parents' prejudice. And they were like, you can't come to my birthday party because you're a hippie.
Yeah.
And I'm like, am I? What even is that? And I remember going home and saying, oh, I'm not allowed to go to so-and-so's birthday party because I'm a dirty hippie. And Mum went, well, you tell so-and-so, because there were quite a lot of born-again Christians in our village. She went, you tell so-and-so that Jesus was the first hippie. So I did.
Sandals, robes, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Long hair.
Yeah.
And in terms of like relationships rather than the imagined orgies that were going on, were people sort of moving in and out of relationships? That's always potentially incendiary, isn't it? Sort of where jealousies rise up and, you know, exclusiveness.
So when Mum first moved there, I think there was open relationships and stuff, and it got difficult if people were in a couple because people got jealous and things. But in terms of like the dynamics and getting on, Mum said it was really difficult if you were a single person and there was a couple, because the couple would always back each other up. So that was really hard. And because people were moving and leaving and coming and going and all the rest, tended to be when couples got really solid, they wanted to leave and have their own space. And the communes that seemed to work better, people had their own personal space, but communal space too. So they had the option of kind of retreating from the communal bit. Because I was born there, there was no midwife. My mum was all into sort of natural childbirth, and you know we didn't even have toothpaste. We brushed our teeth with sage and salt. So when I was born, there was only actually 3 people left. So there was a woman from the local village. She was quite a young woman, and then there was a couple and they had a couple of kids. The woman from the couple that was there basically had it in for Mum and started kind of bullying her. And Mum ended up living sort of in one room with 4 kids, cooking on an open fire, getting really struggling. Yeah, Mum was trying to have a sleep in the day, and this woman came in and just started screaming in Mum's face. So Mum sort of attacked her and pulled her hair, right? And this woman stuck her hair on a bit of card and drew a love heart around it and stuck it on the door.
Not sure what that means.
I don't know, but everyone in the village was really worried about my mum, and they were like, "This is not right. She's, you know, she's getting quite savagely bullied here." Yeah, so there was a guy in the village. He wrote to my granny actually and said, "Your daughter is really suffering, and we think you should help her. Everyone in the village is really concerned about her. She's living in one room with 4 children. She's having a horrible time. She's got no money." And the day that letter arrived, the vicar came to visit her. And he said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm writing my daughter out of my will." And he said, "You can't do that, that's immoral." So the day that coincided with the day that this letter arrived from the hippies in the village. And so my granny gave her a small amount of money so that Mum could leave. So she left the commune and bought an old shop in the next village, and we all moved out. But then we moved back a year later. And meanwhile, a whole new load of people had moved to the commune, including my stepdad. Sorry, he was living in this squat in Watford. He was a working class man from Barking. Got married young, was living in a flat, flicking through the Time Out, looked in the back of the Time Out, and there was this little advert saying, "Want to find yourself? Ring this number." And phone rang. He was just about to hang up. And this American voice said, "Hello? And he said, do you want to find yourself?" She said, "Yeah, come to this number Thursday at 7 o'clock, come to this address in Watford." So he went to this address in Watford. It was a big squat. And they were experimenting with all these different types of therapy. So this one was, it was called drilling, right? And it was like, speed dating.
Not from personal experience, but yeah. I know it is theoretically, yeah.
So it was like that. And you go with the problem. So I said to you, "What's your problem?"
My problem, bite my nails.
What could you do about that?
Stop biting them.
What else could you do?
Not worry about it.
What else?
Cut the ends of my fingers off.
What else?
Paint them in some poisonous stuff. I can see where this is going.
And then you swap. and then you ask me what my problem is, and it's like you're drilling for an answer, and then you swap around to your partner, and then at some point you have this eureka moment where you're like, I've got the answer. So Neil was hooked. He was like, wow, this is great. And he basically moved in. So he was he was like a working class Londoner. He'd never really been into the countryside. He ended up going to the south of France. He fell in love with the nature. Basically. Went back to this squat in London, and someone at the squat had moved to the commune in Norfolk. And he said, you've got to come to this fair in Norfolk. It's called the Last Barsham Fair. You'll love it. Come. And the rules were no electrics, no motor vehicles, like it's got to be medieval, things handcrafted. I mean, the hippies were really into learning how to make things that were properly crafted. You know, it was this whole renaissance, finding your thing, you know, and having the time and the space to develop it. I mean, I'm really grateful for that as a human being, because I think that's really precious. Yeah, so he went to the Last Barsham Fair, right? You know, he just loved it. And then the guy who'd been living in the squat in Watford said, well, don't go back to London, come back to Shrubb. And then he moved to Shrubb, and then he met Mum. So we moved back all together to Shrubb, me, Mum, Neil, my 2 brothers. And then that was like phase 2 of living at Shrubb.
For the last 4 years, an old farmhouse in Norfolk has been home for the Shrubb family, a commune of young people who live together, who try and survive on their own resources, and who quietly reject the values of the consumer society which surrounds them and to which they all once belonged. One of the things that the group talk about rather vaguely is living in harmony with nature. The chickens, of course, are free range. The children have the rewards of gentle husbandry. They give corn to the hens, and the hens give their eggs to them. Milk comes from the 2 goats which usually graze the fields of a friendly neighbouring farmer. The cycle of life is very much in evidence. Nothing is wasted, not the surplus milk for the goats' kids, not even the kids' droppings.
There's a compost. Whatever, you know, we try to recycle everything from the goats, wood ash from the fire, all gets put on it somewhere or other, so everything's really going around in a complete circle.
Everybody around the table is very much aware that the food that they're about to eat comes from the earth, even though they have to depend on bulk buying for some of their largely vegetarian diet. Dinner time is one occasion when the whole family comes together. They hold hands in silence before they eat.
It means that, you know, before you get a meal together, you're very hassled, you're running around doing all sorts of things. And by holding hands together around the table, you calm right down, and we don't say anything, we just sort of think whatever we want to.
Together. For most of the time they split up into little groups for work or play. But they're all very much aware of their dependence on one another, and all of them feel that they learn something from it.
I think you learn about yourself by the way people react to you. You know, you're surrounded by lots of people, and all the time, it's like everyone's a mirror, you know, and you're seeing yourself in them. And this is how you find out about yourself. And when there's a lot of people around, then you're getting lots of reactions, you know, and you're finding out where you are, you know, and what you really think and what you believe. And so as it goes on, it gets clearer and clearer, you know, and you become more aware of yourself and aware of your impact on other people and aware of the sort of person you are. Whereas if you're by yourself and you don't have any sort of deep relationships with anyone, then you tend to get isolated, you know, you get out on a limb.
Do you have conflicts, you know, and situations which become uncomfortable between you, which you have to sort out?
Yeah. Oh, sure. I mean, it's there's always ups and downs.
That's learning too, though, isn't it? Yeah. I think the important thing is that we base this family on love. You know, and that's what we said. And there were only 2 of us. We said, well, let's live with people we love and not base it on anything else. And it's worked out really well. That's all you need. We're just like brothers and sisters. And the sex doesn't seem to come into it.
Yes, it's not loving in a sexual way, it's loving in a family way.
You don't have to have anything to do with sex in a deep relationship. And if you happen to be a lover with somebody, then that's maybe better.
And every time I get a lift with a man, he asks me about this place, and he says how many men are there and how many women. And when he hears more men than women, he says, oh, doesn't that create problems? And that's why they're interested. They're just interested in the sex thing. And they don't want to know about anything else half the time. Well, if I was on my own, there wouldn't really be anyone else for Rufus to play with. He wouldn't have brothers and sisters without me having more children. And I don't really want more children. At the moment, I don't think it's right, really. And he's got lots of fathers and mothers here as well. I think it's a very, very secure situation, actually, for a child. It's much more secure than if he was just living with two parents on a housing estate. Because, like, if I'm ill, there's always someone else who can take over, you know. Or if I get upset, then there's always someone who isn't upset.
Ever since the commune started, there have been Shrubb family members of the church choir. Richard is the latest of a line of tenors. To some people it might seem odd that such an unconventional group should win the respect of the church. But when some members of the family were brought before the local magistrates on a charge of possessing pot, it was the village parson who stood up for them.
There's a real sort of detachment from material acquisitiveness, which is what we parsons are always on about. There's a very real sharing, which is, again, is something that Christianity is supposed to have shown to the world. And most of all, I think, is their acceptance of people, old, young, disregarding status and the way of dress. They accept people. And I think the barriers which are often erected between people in normal life are broken down in that community because they have this love of one another and acceptance of one another. Now, these are the things which, to my mind, are so impressive.
Working for one another, trying to find ways of living together, loving one another, are perhaps the most important things to the Shrubb family, far more important than chasing the things that money can buy.
Sylvia, your mum had moved there in 73. When was it that you guys left then?
In 1980, because it's difficult to talk about because I was little and I wasn't really aware of any of this, but there was some heavy shit going on there. There was a couple who lived there. He used to tell everyone that his dad was a Nazi. He was German, and he ran the kids show at these fairs. But he was a really nasty piece of work. Everyone was frightened of him, and he was a bully basically. But also, was worse than that. I think he was messing around with kids, and we heard that he got sent down for that later. And the thing is that I wasn't aware of this at the time, but I think a lot of the power dynamics were worked out through sex. It was like a sort of way my older brother describes it. He said it was like a pride of lions. It got quite nasty and quite abusive, I would say. She said I was a pretty fearless kid, and I think that people who are predatory around children tend to go for children who...
Vulnerable.
Yeah. And Mum said everyone was frightened of this bloke apart from one person. And that was me. And I was 4. Yeah, she said Nancy used to stamp her foot and say no. He was trying to like control everyone. I actually quite liked him because he ran the kids show, but at the fairs. But there was something about him that I didn't like. So like he would do stuff like he would play with all of us kids and then he'd say, right, now fuck off. And I think, well, that's not very polite. We've been told we're not allowed to swear. Like, why are you telling us to fuck off? But I was quite resilient. And I actually think I was very lucky in a lot of ways because I was resistant to a lot of some of that stuff just by the nature of the kind of kid I was.
That sort of darkness was part of the reason to leave.
The thing is, you get dysfunction and darkness in all families, straight families, hippie families, all sorts of families. It's very hard living with people, full stop. She then moved back to this house that she'd bought, but that was full of people too. Everyone thought it was a commune. It was actually full of lodgers. A lot of them were blokes whose wives had kicked them out. But I loved it. I loved having all these people around. As a child, I really flourished in that context. You know, I loved being part of a big family, having older brothers and sisters. I loved having lots of grown-ups around, and also hadn't had no awareness about my dad at this stage. I mean, I had Neil, who's sort of like my stepdad, but and this sounds really dodgy, but I had a lot of older men friends who I just totally loved and like wanted them to be my dad, but they were nice people. They were good people. I was just lucky, I think.
Because the times are changing. When you wrote me that Thatcher comes, the Wicked Witch, right? And of course the Cold War freeze that was going on, this fear of that the cruise missiles come, CND marches, and you talk about taking the horse and wagon on the Star March from Norfolk to Greenham.
That was so amazing. The Star March was just incredible.
And I talked to Talia, about that. But she was one of the original women who did the first march coming from Wales.
Yeah, I listened to that.
And an extraordinary time, I think. Your mum was an amazing character, and just to say as well that she was sent to prison, wasn't she?
She went to Holloway prison for 10 days.
For cutting the perimeter of the nuclear airbase. She was one of the women who went down for that, right?
Yeah. She said it was just like boarding school.
We're running out of time here, Nancy, and it's an amazing story. You're writing the book about it, which is going to be terrific. And I'm going to mention also some of the other communities which you turn me on to, up where we are in Scotland half the time. There's the Findhorn Foundation, which isn't really a community in the same sense anymore, but the Scorreg, which is on the west coast, which is still flourishing as a completely off-grid, community. Okay. It's a bit more kind of posh than I think the Shrubb Farm.
Yeah,
the houses are like well-insulated bungalows with with all the panels and stuff. But it's a 5-mile walk to get to Scorreg, or you have to, they travel by boat to get there. It's at the end of the headland, and they're still doing it. And it's actually, in some ways, many of the things which you talk about, the kind of cooperation and the self-sufficiency and the issues are the same. But just to finish off, because the amazing thing about Shrubb Farm is that it's still going.
Yeah, it is still
so
going.
What's happening there now? If anybody, I don't think any listeners want to pop up and see what's going on.
Well, do you know what? I don't really want to go there till I finish writing this book, because I don't want to burst the bubble of all my memories. But I do know some things that have been going on there. I know that it was monopolised by one family for a very long time. They tried to kind of usurp it, but they couldn't because of this legal clause of it being a limited company. They just couldn't do it. They've gone now. And I think, like I say, it always goes round in cycles of like honeymoon periods and stuff. But the last I heard about Shrubb is that there were quite a lot of young people living there, and that they were sort of second generation hippie kids, people like me, who may be sort of like in between trying to work out what they want to do with their lives, which is great. I think with the housing crisis and also with the climate crisis, people are starting to think about different ways of living. And also there's always been a curiosity about intentional communities. They are interesting places.
Yeah. Nancy Thompson, thanks very much for coming to the Bureau of Lost Culture.
Thank you for having me. It's very nice talking to you.
What a rollicking tale that was. Quite tumultuous, quite complicated in some ways, but rather wonderful. And listen, life's complicated, right? Whether you grew up in a commune or you grew up in the suburbs. I'm glad that Nancy's writing a book about her childhood and about her extraordinary mum. It got me thinking, I wonder whether there's ever going to be a return to that kind of ideological communal living. I mean, there are plenty of intentional communities around still, as we mentioned, and I wonder whether part of the solution to our crazy housing problem might be something along those lines. However, in the intervening years, let's call it the powers that be, put it that way, they've made it a lot more difficult, making squatting virtually impossible and fencing off what was once common land for all of us. I recently saw a brilliant documentary. It's called Free Party, A Folk History. It's about the free party and festival scene of the 90s. I think I'm going to do a show about it soon. And one of the most tragic things about that whole time was to see that the way that our government basically took away our rights. The people who were supposed to represent us actually are out for their own interests much of the time. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox now, at least for a while, at least till next time. Nancy also gave me several tips for future investigations around some of the things that we talked about, and I hope they will feature in future shows. If you want to make suggestions, do write to us, bureauoflostculture@gmail.com. It's always great to hear from countercultural friends. Let's end this episode with a return to the country via the music of the Clerkenwell Kid. This is Slinky's Dream. See you down the road, round the bend, over the hillsides, for more stories from the underground, from the other side.